Alright, dear students, here we have another example about how to solve trigonometric equations. And again, we have to find the value for the angle. In this case, look, we have 2 cosine square of x plus cosine of x minus 1 equals 0 in the interval from 0 pi included to 2 pi not included. And then, look, the first thing that I want you to realize is that you have here a trigonometric equation which look like a quadratic equation, because this cosine is being raised to the second, then we have the mid term, and then the third term, which is the independent term. How are we going to solve it? Factorizing, dear students, as if we were factorizing any quadratic equation, okay? So look, we're going to rewrite it here. 2 cosine square of x plus cosine of x minus 1 equals 0. In this case, I am going to factorize using the cross method, okay? Look, first I'm going to look for 2 terms that multiplied gives me 2 cosine square of x. Check, if I multiply 2 cosine of x times cosine of x, I get 2 cosine square of x, okay? So these 2 terms are going to work for me now. And then I go to the third term, to the independent one, and I'm going to look for 2 numbers, because I don't have any letter here, any variable. 2 numbers that multiply give me the minus 1. So if I multiply 1 times minus 1, I get minus 1. Okay, and now this is not so easy, but sometimes you get the correct combination very fast, but sometimes you have to keep trying and trying with different combinations of numbers, okay? In this case, the next step, dear students, is that you're going to multiply 2 cosine of x times 1, I mean horizontally. 2 cosine of x times 1, and we get 2 cosine of x, because we're multiplying all this by 1. And then, we're again, horizontally, we're going to multiply cosine of x times minus 1, and we get minus cosine of x. We have to add these 2 answers, and we have to get, dear students, the same term that we have in the mid-term. So, if we have 2 cosine of x minus cosine of x, we get cosine of x, positive cosine of x. And look, here we have positive cosine of x. So when you get the same thing here and in the midterm, that means that this combination is the correct one. And then you just cross, so in order to get the factors, okay? So we have 2 cosine of x, and we join this one with minus 1. So we cross in order to get the factor, and the other factor would be cosine of x plus 1, okay? Then we write down the factors, and we equalize each of them to 0. So we have 2 cosine of x minus 1 equals 0, and the other factor, cosine of x plus 1 equals 0. And then we continue solving for x, as we always do. Now we have cosine of x equals 1/2, because we are adding 1 in both sides of the equality, and we get 1 in order to cancel this negative 1. And then we multiply by the multiplicative inverse of 2 in both sides, and we get that here we are dividing by 2, okay? So we continue solving for x, and we have x equals a inverse cosine of 1/2. So we have solved this one, and then we solve for x in the other factor. So we have a cosine of x equals minus 1, and then x equals the inverse cosine of minus 1, okay? Now, once we have done this, we have to get the answer, because here we have the answer for one of the factors and the answer for the other factors. So we have to look for all the solutions. Now, I want you to focus in the unit circle, and then look, here we have inverse cosine of 1/2. And remember, cosine are the values in x or y? In x, okay. So in x, here we have, where x is positive here, because the value that we have here inside the parentheses is positive. So where cosine is positive, in which quadrants? I mean, in quadrants 1 and 4. So we look now we know that for the inverse cosine of 1/2, we have the answers in quadrant 1 and quadrant 4. And then, for the other factor, it says the inverse cosine of -1. And in which quadrants cosine is negative? Okay, so as this is x, the values for x in quadrant 2 and quadrant 3. Okay, but careful, I'm going to explain you about this later, okay? First, let's see this one. We're going to get the solutions for the inverse cosine of 1/2. First of all, dear students, take out the calculators and I want you to get the answers where the cosine is, you can look for if you remember about the unit circle, you can look for the answers where the cosine is 1/2. But if no, take out the calculator and look for the inverse cosine of 1/2, but careful, you have to, the calculator must be working in what, dear students? Radians, because the interval is given in radians, okay? Now, the calculator is going to give you this, pi thirds. In which quadrants is pi thirds? Okay, so you remember that it is here, boom, okay, in quadrant 1. So you already have the answer in quadrant 1. But how are we going to get the answer in quadrant 4, where cosine also is positive? So we have to look for this one, which is the reflection, remember? Okay, teacher. We are going to look for the reference angle of this one. So remember, the reference angle is the distance from the terminal side to the nearest part of the x-axis. Okay? As in this case, this is the angle pi thirds. The reference angle is also pi thirds. Okay? So here we have the reference angle. And how are we going to look for the answer in quadrant 4? We have here 2 pi. In this part. So we are going to subtract 2 pi minus the reference angle. Boom. Okay? So that's what I am doing this calculation, which is 2 pi minus pi thirds, which is the reference angle, and I get 5 pi thirds, which is the second answer for inverse cosine of 1/2. And then let's see the last one. We have x equals inverse cosine of -1. But I want you to again focus here in the unit circle and look, dear students. We have the terminal side is here, in this case, boom. Exactly over, it is lying over the x-axis, because this is the point. In this angle, which is pi, we have the point -1, 0. And remember that here we have the cosine and the sine. Okay? So when cosine is -1, as we have it here, in this angle, which is pi, in radians, if it were in degrees, it would be 180. But as this is radians, pi. So that's why you are getting pi. If you type in your calculator the inverse cosine of -1, it is going to give you pi. So you already have the answer. But if you look for it in the unit circle, anyway, you're going to get very fast the solution. Okay, dear students? And that's why in this trigonometric equation, we are getting 1, 2, and 3 answers. Okay? Good, dear students. Have a nice day. And something important that I wanted to explain you is this. When you get a value here in the parentheses, which is greater than 1 or less than -1, you're going to get a math error. And that means that you're doing it right. That just means that there is no solution. Why? Because remember, in the unit circle, here we are getting the point 1, 0. And here it could be, let me write it here. It could be, but it is here, 0, 1, here -1, 0, and in this one we have 0, -1. As you can see, you do not have any value in this case for cosine, in this case, greater than 1, because this is the point that you have here, okay? So if you get a value inside the parentheses greater than 1, or in case of the cosine, less than minus 1, you are going to get a math error. You are just going to write there is no solution, okay? And also, if we were calculating for sine, the same thing, because sine is here. Sine lies over the y-axis, remember? So when you get that you're looking for an inverse sine of a number greater than 1 or less than minus 1, again, you're going to get a math error in the calculator, and this is correct. That means that there is no solution, okay? Good, dear students, have a nice day. Take your stay at home, and let's continue working hard.